Hello, friends. All right. Look at us getting everybody in here. Hello, welcome. All right. So we are recording this. So if anybody does not want to be on camera recorded, feel free to go cameras off. I like to see everybody. I think it's a little bit more fun, but I totally get it. So don't feel pressured anyway. I'm gonna go ahead and pop my screen up here. There we go. That moves everything around. This is perfect timing for this topic for so many reasons. One of them being I am trying to make the giant, or at least it feels giant to me, um, leap to a Mac from a PC, and it is like challenging every single control freak instinct I have. So I've been switching back and forth between the computers because I don't have everything set up on each computer. So here we are on my PC. I am ready to go. I know we've still got some folks coming in, but since we have a short amount of time, I'm actually going to go ahead and get started. So as usual, feel free to drop any questions that you might have into the chat, and I'll kind of keep an eye on that throughout the session, but also, either weave them in or we'll tackle them at the end. So I want to make sure if there's any specific questions that you have, that we have space for that. So this is session 2 in what I'm calling the Courageous Transformation series, which sounded like a big, bold, audacious title when I put it together. But really, as I've kind of embraced these concepts really seriously in my own life over the past number of years, and then really dug in for the purposes of putting the content together for this, it is about transformation, absolutely, but it does require courage. Even if they're small little transformations we're making, like my transition from PC to being, hopefully someday, if I do it successfully, an actual Mac user. So transitions was the piece for today. So we've kind of already tackled courageous transformation, like what does that sort of look like in and of itself? But why talk about transitions specifically? Like, why do we need to like even dig into this? Like, Nicole, can't we just get to whatever the next thing is? Like, what happens after we've sort of done the work, or, like the kind of are we there yet sort of feeling? And the reason I wanted to talk about transitions specifically is because if we miss this part of it, if we just move from the initial idea and kind of our imposter syndrome, whatever's holding us back, moving through those barriers, and we sort of like skip this step and get right to the very end, it's kind of like what you're seeing in the picture. Or if you kind of like build that out a little bit, from the original idea of like, ooh, I want something to be a little bit different, through imposter syndrome, other barriers, and then the transition, it's like we're kind of not getting all of it out that we could from the transformation that we're going through. And true transformation really doesn't work that way. You can't skip this kind of central step of the transition piece of it. So not only can you not skip it, but you can actually make it better. And that's what I really wanted to kind of focus on in today's webinar. So what is a transition? I want to kind of set the stage a little bit with that. We think about a transition, and there's a couple of definitions that you see on the screen. A change from one thing to the next, either in action or state of being. So this is the part where we're doing the work to get to kind of that end state of once we've accomplished the change. But this part is the place where we're actually in the change process, whether it's something that we're doing differently, right? There's a new habit, there's a new way of responding to something, there's a new way of approaching work, or a new way of being. And that's a lot of the thought work that comes in, like a different way to think, a different way to feel throughout your days. That's why I'll often say to my coaching clients, what feeling do you want to have? How do you want this to feel? Because that process, before we get to the actual thing we're transforming or transforming into, that's just as important. It's an equally critical part of the whole process. It's also defined as that process or a period of changing from one state or condition to another. And what's important there is that transitions aren't usually quick. And this is where a lot of people find a lot of frustration and experience a lot of momentum loss because we take it from idea like, ooh, I want this thing to be different, whether it's a behavior, whether it's an action, an outcome, state, system around you, whatever it is. And then we want to like be in the end state, right? We don't like this part of it because we want to just kind of get there already. But that's why transitions are important, because there's sort of this place where we're in this period of changing. So expect them not to go quickly. Sorry, shocker, newsflash, expect it not to go quickly. A couple synonyms for transition, a shift. So you think even if you're just shifting feet, shifting your weight back and forth, there's some movement that's required to do that. A passage, I thought that was a really cool kind of visual of sort of going through, people say, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, or somebody's like, I don't know if that's a light at the end of the tunnel or an oncoming train. But there's some sort of passage going on, some sort of passageway. So you might visualize it as something to go through, and maybe it's not real clear where you're headed. Or I also like this as sort of a metaphor of a rite of passage. So like in ancient societies, when somebody was ascending to a new level in the community, there's often a rite of passage that they have to endure to get from wherever they were to that sort of transformed state of being. A changeover, a metamorphosis. I liked that one. I always think of Kafka, and turning into the giant, I think it was a cockroach, right? Like that whole transformation or development. So for my fellow very cerebral people, even just thinking of this as some sort of development, but we develop so that we can do things better. We develop intentionally with sort of that desire to move forward, move into something that could be better. Now, there is another one that I also like, and there's a reason that the caterpillar's up on the screen. So I often think of transitions as like the caterpillar soup phase. Now, I've written a newsletter about this, but the idea of caterpillar soup, that's the state of being, right? So the state of being, that period of transition that a caterpillar undergoes before it becomes a butterfly. Now, caterpillars actually completely dissolve, meaning their cellular structures literally no longer exist. So when they're in the chrysalis, they're actually caterpillar soup. So all of the parts are present, but they're completely disassembled. And they have these cells called imago cells. The imago cells tell them how to reassemble their structure into a new state of being. But what's happening during that transition is critical, because if it's disrupted at any point, if it's cut short at any point, then the transition actually will never occur fully. So the transformation's not complete. So we pay attention to transitions because they're actually critical for us being successful in that desired end state. So when I say they take time, it doesn't mean it takes years or decades. It may, depending on what you're transforming. But it just means that we need to hold space for it not to be immediate and to really do the work of the actual change process that we go through in that transition. So when I was saying about this and why, again, why talk about transitions? Because they're uncomfortable. Generally speaking, they're uncomfortable. It's not the most enjoyable thing that any of us will experience in our lives. It's the place where we really encounter those barriers to true transformation. So some of the barriers come before the idea of what we want to transform is even possible. And then once we've got that idea and we go, yeah, that's the thing, then the real work begins. Then we get the questioning, then we get the self-doubt, then we get the imposter syndrome. Then we start to transition and we figure out like, wait a minute, this isn't actually happening. Why is this not moving as quickly as I, kind of hoped it would? So you encounter those barriers to transformation, and it doesn't always feel great when we do it. It also requires intense energy output. Again, caterpillar soup, caterpillar ain't doing anything other than just dissolving and reassembling itself while it's in there. It's not also trying to write the great American novel. It's not trying to lose 20 pounds, obviously, hypothetically speaking. It's not trying to, also accomplish a 100-day yoga challenge. It's really focused. And in those times of transition, especially the ones that are, of prolonged duration or intense in the sense of dramatic shifts, especially where you're disrupting other people's experience of you, that intense energy output is going to be really a part of the experience. Um, it's also a time when we challenge assumptions. And that really is twofold because it's our own assumptions about what's possible, but it's also other people's assumptions about us, right? So you've heard me say, like, if anybody's ever should all over you, you should go for that job. You should be the supervisor. You should do that. You should try keto. You should do yoga. You should do meditation. You should, you should, you should. And they're like shoulding all over us, right? That's because they have assumptions about how we live our lives or how they want to experience or how they're used to experience us or expecting to experience us. So when all of a sudden we start moving from caterpillar into the butterfly stage, people are like, whoa, wait. And that can be kind of untethering for them. That piece about our own assumptions, though, this is like foundational shifts that occur in our thinking. Again, that's going to build that intense energy output. There's often more lessons to be learned in transitions. In fact, that's one of my strategies for kind of navigating them, is asking what else is there to be learned here, because it's usually not just one thing that's changing, it's other behaviors. So I recently embarked on a journey with Weight Watchers and have been trying to eat more healthy and work on my mindset. And it's definitely not just about losing weight, because that only works if the mindset shifts with it. Well, then with the mindset shifting, now I'm questioning, like, whoa, where did some of these, things and thought frameworks come from? Where are some of these self-critical thoughts? So often one transformation will kind of trigger these other either mini transformations in and of themselves, or some of these bigger transitions in how we're thinking and how we're operating. And then the idea is to move away from, can I just survive this transition? Can I just make it through? Can I actually thrive through this? So can the transition period itself be something that's also empowering and positive and powerful, not just something that I'm like, oh my God, please just reassemble, get me out of caterpillar soup and into the butterfly phase. So can we really actually optimize them? So with that in mind, what I wanted to do was give you 9 strategies for moving through transitions powerfully. And this is really the bulk of the items for today. So number 1, as I was just mentioning, that mindset shift. This is not just something to survive through, but how can I thrive through it instead? So a lot of folks are switching jobs right now or wanting to, but in the event that you are, I've got one client that is still employed, has already accepted another job, but they have this transition period, right? Where they're going to be leaving their organization, wrapping things up, then prepping for the next one, and then stepping into this next role. So transformation's complete when they start the new job, right? So caterpillar soup is kind of what's happening in the middle. And what we're really working on is, what is the way to make this a period of thriving, not just something that I've got to like put my head down and survive through until I'm at the next thing. So, she's working on a bunch of her strategies, but that mindset shift of, I've just got to make it through the next few weeks. That's the piece to challenge and see really, how can I actually make this something that could be beneficial instead? Number 2, I mentioned the intense energy output. One of the ways to move through these transition periods is to recognize that and then actually allow yourself some room, some space, some rest, some downtime, some rejuvenation, some intentional recharge work to make sure that you have the energy you need to get through it. That's why it says adjust accordingly elsewhere. There's lots to be learned and there's lots of stuff that you could tackle later. So we want to do all the things all the time, all at once. I would suggest that maybe you narrow that focus, allow yourself the space to move through one individually, maybe put a pin in some of those ones you want to come back to, and then really work to intentionally give yourself some rest elsewhere. I dealt with this back in February. I'm like I was going through a life coaching training program. I wanted to start rebranding my website. I was doing the Weight Watchers thing. I was doing a 30-day yoga challenge. I was like trying to transition my daughter's bedtime schedule, all of these things. And I was working with my coach, and she was like, pick one. Pick one. It doesn't mean you're not going to make progress in the other areas, but what's the real primary focus? So kind of honing that in, and then I intentionally had room now, because I wasn't scattering the focus, to rest a little bit more and really give my body and my spirit what it needed to pay attention. Number 3, prioritize alignment. And what I mean by this is, as you are going through these transitions, you're moving into, you're transforming, right? This is the whole point of transformation, into something different. Ideally, that something different is going to be more aligned with who you are authentically, what feels better for you, what's more in line with the type of life you want to have, the type of career you want to build. And so build on that thread of alignment and start to prioritize that even in small ways. If you have a, you know, 4 pump, quadruple venti, extra whipped cream, blah, 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 coffee shop habit. And part of the transformation you're making is into a better financial position. I don't know, whatever it is. Or you're transforming into something where your income is actually going to be lower, and this is a drain area. See if you can start to align even that behavior into something that's similar to the transformed state that you want to end up in. That's, again, kind of what's the feeling? How do you actually want this to feel at the end of it? See where you can start to draw that thread of alignment, not just to the end state, but even to these little steps that you'll take along the way. Number 4, filter your inputs or ignore the haters. A good friend of mine, Jay Baer, is an international best-selling author of, I don't even know how many books, but one of his most famous books is called Hug Your Haters. Now, Jay works in marketing. We are not talking about marketing here. We're talking about personal, courageous transformation. So filtering your inputs can be kind of like taken 2 ways. Number 1, filter out anything that is draining energy or making you feel bad or causing emotional disruption. News, so-called friends, difficult coworkers, critical family members. See if you can filter out some of that stuff. If you ever saw my Netflix profile or the types of books I read on Amazon, a lot of people are like, oh, what are you watching? What are you reading? And I'm like, super silly, lighthearted, comedy, rom-com, light mystery type of stuff, because I'm very sensitive to those types of input. So if it's emotionally heavy or dramatic or difficult, I need to put that in a different category that doesn't filter into my downtime. That actually becomes part of my work day, if it's media or something that I want to intake. Ignoring the haters is actually putting up some of those blocks. I like here the image of the chrysalis again, of if I'm in this thing, this like little cocoon chrysalis, you can't get in. So if you're a hater of mine, you are not getting in my chrysalis. I'm just going to imagine that as a force field. So whatever I need to do to actually hold that space kind of safe and sacred for myself is another strategy. Number 5, let others know and ask for help. So a lot of us will move into a period of transition. So we're trying to make a transformation, and maybe we've told other people about the transformation, but let them into the transition period and ask for that help. That's sort of like building that support squad for yourself. So bring them into what you're doing, intentionally ask for help. And it might not have anything to do with the actual transformation itself, but it may have everything to do with making life easier around, so that you can get that space for rest, even if it's just cognitive rest, not even just physical rest. So make sure that you're actually inviting people into the process. They don't have to be in the cocoon with you, but kind of around so that they can help you, especially if you struggle with filtering inputs, or if there are critical individuals in a common circle. I've done that before with family members, of like, hey, help me out here. I can't deal with this person now. Can you just kind of take it on? And we've been able to adjust it, at least for that time period. So explore that a little bit. Next, soak it in. And this one's a little counterintuitive, again, to the idea that we get into these transition timeframes, right? Maybe you're reintegrating into the workplace. Maybe I've got some municipal clients in that type of industry that, and a couple private clients that are now figuring out how to get back out of reintegrating into the workplace. And so they're finding things aren't working, or there were other efficiencies, or they're dealing with spikes in the Delta variant of COVID. But what they're doing when they're doing it well is being very, very present in that process. That's why I say, like, let yourself marinate in it, because there is more to learn. Like there's more to get out of that. And when we aren't trying to move too quickly through it, you're going to see more of that. So that kind of allow that space to notice what you're noticing and what's coming up for you there. Next, deep practice. Deep practice. This is a really interesting concept. If you've ever heard it takes 10,000 hours to master something. That's like, I don't know, somebody came up with that somewhere. Great idea. Great idea. It doesn't mean you need to take 10,000 hours like right now, because it's going to take a lot of you a long time to get through any transition period. I don't have that kind of patience. But what I do mean is allow that transition period to be a time of deeply practicing the thing that you're moving to. So if the transformation you are making is even just eliminating your internal critical monologue, so that negative internal monologue, we talked about that with imposter syndrome. If we're trying to transform into someone who's not that we don't have that, but that we're not really kind of captive to it, then deep practice that in a bunch of little ways. When like, I don't know, do your hair, like take a minute and be like, yeah, my hair looks good. I'm practicing a positive internal monologue. I'm journaling about how many times I'm having negative thoughts, whatever it is. Like deeply practice. And transition periods, that's one of the ways to actually accelerate through it, so that the transformation comes a little bit sooner, because you're not waiting all the way until the end. You're sort of practicing along the way, and then you really hit the ground sprinting when you get there. Ask, what else is there to learn here? I mentioned that earlier. This is such a powerful question for individual transformation, but also for team transformation. So if you're in a workplace environment where it's a group of people going through something, or your family needs to navigate a big change together. I have a couple of clients who are moving houses, hugely disruptive, right? What else is there to learn here as we're going through that? Build in time for like a brief debrief, a short debrief around that question, so that you're really optimizing the transition. You're getting all of those lessons that you want to get out of it, so that you can be better kind of on the other end. Lastly, I have recently become absolutely enamored with somebody named Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. She is a neuroanatomist who in her late 30s suffered a stroke that took her 9 years to recover from. And she was actually like aware and cognizant of the stroke occurring, lost physical capabilities, lost all the ability for speech, and then eventually ultimately recovered it. And so she's written a number of books. She's amazing. She's the #1 most watched TED Talk of all time. But she has this rule. It's called the 90-second rule. And what Dr. Bolte Taylor has found is that any emotional reaction we're having, good, bad, otherwise, whatever, takes 90 seconds to flush through our systems. So you get frustrated with your partner over something, and that frustration flares. It will cause a chemical reaction in your body. You'll feel it, right? Same way you do with elation or excitement, whatever. You'll feel it. Take 90 seconds and let that flush through your system before you take any action. Try to do it before you even think anymore about what's going on, because what'll happen is you can actually re-stimulate the feeling as you re-trigger that 90-second period. I've been practicing with this for about 2.5 weeks now. And when I'm using it primarily, I'm just using it on negative emotions right now. So if I get frustrated, upset, anxious, I literally make myself sit down, close my eyes, and I count to 90. And by the end of that 90 seconds, I feel physically so different that I'm mentally and emotionally able to choose more intentionally what I want to do next. In that transition period, when all of this questioning is coming up, all of these assumptions, all of this like, oh, am I ever going to get there? All the fear, all of these things are popping up. This 90-second rule can actually really help you step outside of those so that your actions are intentional and not reactive to that kind of emotion or even physical sensation that you're getting. Okay, so I always like to have room for Q&A, so keep them coming if you have them. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. But there's a couple that came through. Let me just kind of scroll through here and go through. Okay. I'm ready for my transition to be over already. It's in all caps. It seems like it's taking forever and I'm getting tired of being in this transitional period. Oh yeah, and then for context, I broke up with my longtime partner and I'm waiting for her to move out. She's having trouble finding a place to live. It's causing a lot of strain at home. I bet that's like physical proximity to a really difficult emotional situation. Okay, so there's not really a direct question written there, but I'm guessing the question is like, how do I get through this? That question, you are getting an opportunity to deeply practice the question, what am I learning here? What else can be learned here? Not about your relationship with your ex-partner, although you could, but really look deeply at what that's doing for you, not just to you. So what are those other lessons here? Okay. So yeah, deep practice on that. And then I would say the rest and kind of like grace and space for yourself, that is an intense energy output just to keep things probably somewhat peaceful at home. So anything you can do to shore that up is going to be beneficial for you. Okay. Right. Another one come in. About the 90-second rule and the chemical changes and sensations you feel when something disturbs you. Is that what people call our gut feeling? Mine feel devastating and like impending doom is upon me, but after a few minutes, I can think more clearly and the situation doesn't feel as dire. Is my body trying to tell me something that my mind is talking me out of, or is this normal? So I think for the person that answered that that asked that question, the difference is probably gut feeling will last beyond that initial period. That's the truer, like essential self internal. That initial reaction, that's that 90-second kind of chemical flash. Think of it as like a big bang sort of response, which is where trying to like just get through that 90 seconds. Distract yourself, focus on counting. I've actually sat and written out the numbers from 1 to 90 because what you don't want to do is fixate on the situation and re-trigger that 90-second loop over and over again. So yeah, I would say that's not your gut feeling. Your gut feeling is what that reaction is and kind of that inner knowing that happens after you've sort of survived that initial impending doom situation. And that's totally normal. Yeah, I do that all the time. Any tips as to how to identify people to be part of your support squad at work when it's a work-related transformation? Could be perceived as weakness that you do need to transform in the first place. Yes, choose wisely. Choose wisely in that support squad. And I would question whether or not it needs to be people in your current work environment to help you do that. It might be better place to have somebody outside of the situation, unless it's somebody that you really trust and can really get behind. The other thing I would say is if you have specific roles for them to play, best to equip them with that so they know kind of what you're actually needing from them. So specifics there. Okay. I'm going back to the office for transition on Wednesday. I have committed to articulating my needs, setting boundaries, and pay attention to my feelings. I did not take care of myself properly before we left for COVID. Yes. So Preeti, absolutely. And anybody that's in those sorts of transitions, especially, the one thing I would say maybe to add to that is to keep track of that in some way. So not just in between our own two ears, but some journal or a note app on your phone. Take a picture of something that represents how you're feeling every day, but sort of keep track of that so that you can monitor that over time as well. I'm a big believer in like putting those visibly somewhere I can see so that I remember to do it and don't just kind of get caught up in that churn. And Preeti, I know you're really experienced at that. Okay, I'm going to sneak one last one in here. I know we're at 12:59, but this one came through. What do you do when it's a transition you don't want and one you didn't ask for? How do you optimize it when you just feel like running away from it or wishing it wasn't happening? Um, Not skipping that step. That's the caterpillar soup. In coaching, we call this being in square one of the change cycle. So not skipping the step of like actually letting yourself dissolve and kind of disintegrate. A lot of people, that's the part we get uncomfortable, we rush through, and then we don't integrate all the lessons, and it either prolongs it or we repeat that pattern. So really making space for that and allowing that grief to happen, honoring that grief that needs to be part of that, not shying away from that, shooting yourself out of it, or feeling like that's not something you can ask for. All right, so I promised to start on time, end on time. It is 1 o'clock and a couple of seconds after. This is my contact info. Feel free to reach out, connect, send me an email. I'm always happy to chat with you. Thank you so much for being here. And I would love even just an update about what kind of transformation you're going through, because I think that's really powerful to share. And back to that kind of support squad question, to know that we're not alone in it either. So I am here for you. Thank you so much and have an absolutely fabulous day. Take care, everybody.